Hey, what's up guys, Pablo Munoz here. Welcome to another video tutorial. Today is all about rendering and presenting your model. This video is very special because I use some of the ideas and the concepts that I teach in the Extra Mile course, the big course that I have online in the Academy. But I've sort of compiled those ideas and those best bits to share them with you because I think they're beneficial to anyone regardless of where you're at in your career or like in your skill development, that sort of thing. I think anyone can benefit from this, and it's all about how you present your model or how you present your concept. It doesn't have to be the most polished and the most like perfect model. It's how you present it. That's the key of this video. So let's go ahead and jump straight into it. All right, so here we have 4 different renders of the same creature, slightly different moods or different scenarios. We're going to talk about all of that. But like I said, the idea with this tutorial is to show you a simple but very effective way to present your 3D concepts and to take them to the next level. Even if they're just some kind of like work in progress or something that is not going to be finished anytime soon, it's all about how it is presented. Okay, let's switch to ZBrush, and here is a quick sketch of this creature. And this is what I would refer to as a work in progress because it is, it is not great. There's not much refinement yet. Everything is kind of like the same subdivision level. And although I have blocked the main pieces, so you have like the neck muscles and all the structure of the cranium and the head, and I have some indication of details for the skin. This is very, very rough. Like at some points, I think you can even see, if you pay attention here, this area, you can even see the clay builder brush strokes here as well. So it is not a clean model by any means. It's just a quick sketch, something that took me like about 20-25 minutes to put together from Dynamic Sphere. Nothing too crazy. Now, the reason I'm mentioning all of these, that this is a very sketchy thing and it's just a work in progress, is that although I still have work to do with this creature, I can definitely produce a high quality render at this stage to share it on my socials or in the portfolio, or even if this character doesn't go anywhere, I can still create a nice render that I can share online. So let's go ahead and start with the practical stuff. And just for your reference, if I look at the subtools, I have the entire head. This was like a dynamic sphere, so I can go into solo mode. So that's basically what the head and the neck is. Then I have a couple of spheres for the eyes, and I have a couple of other dynamic objects from, I think this was like a cylinder for the teeth. But again, it's very, very simple, very basic. You can even see some of the faceted polygons here from the dynamics because I didn't clean that up. So again, I just want to emphasize that this is a work in progress, a very sketchy thing, but the point is how you present it. So basically, if I look at a screenshot of this character from different angles, again, very, very sketchy, but there is a big difference between sharing or presenting something like this, which is just a screenshot of ZBrush with a material that doesn't really add much to it, to presenting something with exactly the same model, but in an environment, in a way that is much more polished and more professional, right? So again, I just want to draw your attention to this again because it is exactly the same model. I haven't worked on anything else other than the presentation. So this video is all about how to present the character. I'm going to show you practical tips in just a second, but I want to make sure that this is the most important part, right? That you can take something that looks a little bit rubbish or something that is not quite there yet, or a work in progress, and presenting it in a nice way that would have a lot more of a visual impact than, let's say, the one on the right than the one on the left. Okay, so let's move this out of the way. And in terms of the practical steps, all I've done here is I exported this as an FBX. So I currently have 4 million polygons for the entire thing. So that's not bad. You can just decimate it a little bit if your computer cannot handle it. But yeah, all you have to do is go to decimation and pre-process that. That is the way to simplify the model. Let's actually do it with this so that I can give you all the steps, right? So let's click on Z plugin, decimate current. So this process in ZBrush basically analyzes the selected subtool. So in this case, the teeth, and you see the bar here at the top. It's pretty quick anyway. And once it's completed, you can go to Z plugin again in Decimation Master, and I'm gonna decimate it back to, I don't know, 5% and click on decimate current. And you see it maintains the volumes, right? But it simplifies this, and now I have 36,000, right? Something a little bit more decent. So you can go ahead and do the same thing with with your face or whatever you're working on. By the way, if you have multiple subtools, which that might be the case, you can also go to the Z plugin palette, and instead of clicking on pre-process current, you can click on pre-process all. That is going to pre-process everything. That's going to take obviously a bit longer, but when it finishes, you can go on a per subtool basis and decimate it to different percentages. So I might want to keep my the base of the head decimated to 20% to grab more of these details, but something like the teeth could be 5%, right? So once you finish decimating your model, so that's something that I've already done for this tutorial, you can go ahead and export this as an FBX, for example. So click on FBX, visible, so whatever you have visible in terms of subtools, click on export, and that will give you an FBX file. So now that you have your sketch or your work in progress out of ZBrush, we can now go ahead and set up the render. All right, so here we have my rendering setup. I'm using Blender 4.0, and as a quick disclaimer, I'm not an expert in Blender, so some of the things that I'm going to show you, I'm sure that if you know more about Blender, you can do this a little bit more efficiently and properly. But I just want to show you what works for me, and I'm choosing Blender not because, again, I'm not an expert on it, but because it is available for anyone that wants to follow this tutorial. I generally use the same concepts, the same ideas in other renderers like Marmoset, Maverick Render, Arnold. It doesn't really matter what render engine you use, is the concepts and the ideas that I'm going to show you that are applicable, right? So what I have here, just as again, a quick breakdown of this simple scene. So I have my creature, the FBX that I imported from ZBrush. I just went ahead and added this extra base, just the cylinder that you see here at the bottom. I have a plane here in the background. Actually, let me just switch to something like this. It's a little bit easier to see. So yeah, I have a simple plane, like an endless screen here out of a plane as the background. I created this cylinder as well. And this is just for the base. The rest is the same thing that I brought in from ZBrush. So I have the creature, the eyes, and the teeth. And I have 4 lights, right? And this is what I'm going to talk about and kind of like show you so that you can set it up in the same way. So I have my background light, fill left, fill right, and key light. So we're going to talk about those things in just a second. But let's go ahead and organize the workspace a little bit better so that we can work faster. So I'm going to hide all my lights. And by the way, I just made all those lights or put those lights into a collection. Same thing for the creature. And I just named the creature. And in case you don't know that, it's very easy. You just select anything that you want to make part of the collection. You can press M and click on New Collection, and that's pretty much it. Or you can also right-click here, create New Collection, name it something maybe like Test Lights. We're going to use that anyway. So I have a new collection, and then you can just drag and drop things in there. All right, so like I said, I'm going to hide the lights, and I think I'm going to leave this as it is. And let's go ahead and click here at the top right corner. If you click and drag, it sort of splits the window. So I'm going to split it like so, and then I'm also going to split this one horizontally. So I'm going to click and drag down. So I have 3 windows. And if you have multiple monitors, what you can do as well is hold the Shift key and click on the corner as well. And that sort of like tiers the panel. So if you have another monitor, you can put that one on the right-hand side or the left-hand side. But for the sake of the tutorial, I'm going to do it this way. So in the one on the left-hand side, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the camera that I have. This should be created by default with the default scene. But if you don't have a camera, you can press Shift-A. You can just go to camera and create a new one. So I'm going to select that one, press 0 on my number pad, and that sort of like frames the camera. And with the camera selected here on the right-hand side, I'm going to go here to the camera settings. I'm going to open up the viewport display, and this password 2 that is enabled, I'm going to drag this all the way to 1. Okay, so that sort of like blocks anything that is outside this area. Also, let's go ahead and zoom in a little bit more. And another thing that I like to do is I'm going to press the middle mouse button here on this bar. So middle mouse button to drag. And I'm going to turn this off, these 2 things, so that we have like a very clean view of this render. So this is going to be the way that we judge the final render. This one is going to be the 3D viewport, or to manipulate the 3D scene. And this one is going to be the materials. So let's switch this from the drop down here to the shader editor. So this is going to be essentially our working space. We're going to manipulate things from here. We're going to change materials and all of that from here. And we're going to visualize the result in here. As an extra side note, this is an extra little trick in case you didn't know. What I just did here with the middle mouse button can be done anywhere, obviously. But in ZBrush, if I go back to ZBrush, if you have multiple things in a menu, for example, if I switch this back to my custom UI, right, you see I have a bunch of things in here. So if I open up my left panel, right, some of them get hidden. If you hold Control key and the left mouse button, you can do the same thing, right? So you can have multiple things in here and then just use Control to drag and select different things that might be hidden depending on how you use ZBrush. Anyway, this is just nothing to do with what we're doing. I just thought an extra little tip in there. All right, so for the one on the left-hand side, I'm also going to click on Render. And for the rendering, let's go ahead and open up this tab in here. I'm using Blender Cycles, GPU, Compute, and Denoise. So those are the things that that I change. So by default, it should be Eve. So I just went ahead and click on Cycles, GPU compute, and the noise, right? You don't see anything right now because I turned off all the lights. You might actually, by default, see this, something like gray. So if you go to the world and go to the strength of this color, just set this one to 0. I like to work without any influence of the environment so that I can see the true effect of each light that I add. But later on, we can just use this to add a little bit of ambient light. You know, it's always nice to have something there. All right, so let's set this back to 0. And in here, let's go ahead and create our first light. So I'm going to press Shift A, and I'm going to click on light and click on area light. Now, you can use anything that you want. I would recommend to use the area lights. Personally, I think they're more versatile than some of these ones for what I'm going to show you. But in some cases, you might want to use spot or point. In this case, area light is perfectly fine. All right, so now we have an area light. I'm just going to press the G key on my keyboard and push this up. And still, you don't see anything here on the left-hand side because it's probably too small. So I'm going to press the S on my keyboard just to scale that up. And here in the properties of this area, or this area light, I'm going to crank this up quite a bit so that I can see what it's doing. All right. Now, this is where things started to get a little bit tricky because you can lose or you can override all the hard work that you put into your sculpt and into your textures if you have textures by doing a very flat, very boring light. So lighting is very, very important to communicate the idea, right? Or to present your character, which is what we're talking about. This is the reason why I call the rendering and lighting module within the Extra Mile the make or break, because you can ruin everything that you've done so far, or you can completely enhance it, which is ultimately the idea of these tips. So that is just to say that you don't need to add a bunch of lights, you know, like all the lights that I had before. Those are just the things that I want to show you, but you can totally create something that is very compelling, very convincing with a single light. You don't need more than that. So just to show you an example of that, I'm going to go ahead and double click this light. I'm going to call it my key light. And this is generally how I start my renders or like presentation renders. I create one key light, and that is the main light. And in most cases, that should be the strongest light that you have in your scene anyway. So starting with something like that is pretty good. Now, the reason I mentioned the area lights are pretty versatile is because if you look here at the bottom of this slide, you have the spread. So the spread is how concentrating the rays or the effect of this light. So I'm going to actually render this as well. So I'm going to put it in the render mode just so that you can see what I'm doing. So I'm going to click and drag this one down, and you see how I start to reduce the spread of that light, right? So we can just create something very, very sharp with, you know, if we set it to 0, it's going to be a square light, kind of like a skybox or something lighting up the scene. Now, this is pretty cool. And like I said, very versatile because this is different from the size. So the size could be, you know, like a huge light panel from the top or something really, really pointy. So you can just play around with the two things. Now, I'm just going to add a little bit of this spread. I don't need it to be that sharp, and maybe reduce the size a little bit. And the size of your light source, that will determine how sharp the shadows are. So if I make something really, really, really tiny, right? This is kind of like a laser beam or a torch. You see the shadows are pretty sharp. But if I push this to a larger size, everything is very, very diffuse. So all these things that I'm telling you is just for you to think about what is the mood and what is the type of render that you want for your creature. Now, I'm going to go ahead and reduce this quite a bit. Again, let's set it to 0.8. That should be okay. And let's go ahead and press the G key to move this around. And also the R key on my keyboard just to rotate it based on the camera. So I'm just going to move them to the right-hand side and start rotating. You can also double press the R on your keyboard, and that gives you this sort of like rotation from the pivot. And I think something like this will work quite nice. I spent a lot of time just setting up my key light, to be honest, but in an effort to save some time for this tutorial, so it doesn't become like really, really long. Yeah, I'm just going to leave it like that. All right. Let's go back to this one. So now you can see on the left-hand side, I have a single light, nothing else, not even ambient light. And it looks all right. I wouldn't say it's a great render, but it's starting to look all right. So I want to show you what I'm looking for when I set up my key light. The first and most important thing that I look for is to make sure that the volumes on my character are showing nicely. And that is achieved, generally speaking, through contrast. So you see my character has a pretty weird shape anyway. It's just a creature, but I have all of this area right here. This is a light pattern, or the pattern that is created by the cast shadow from the light source. So all of this is generating quite a nice contrast in here in comparison with the light areas, which in this case is a lot more, right? So there are different terms of the light, but I'm just gonna keep this simple anyway. So I think this is working fine, but the whole point is just to try to find a better way to add contrast. So if I push this all the way to the right, again, there's a little bit more contrast, but then I'm losing a lot of the definition here on the left-hand side. So this is where you can start thinking about, okay, this is showing an interesting part of the model, but I might need an extra light so that I can fill this area, or a fill light to fill this area. All right, so that's basically the concept of it. Just whatever you decide to add, whatever light you decide to bring into the table, it needs to have a purpose. So don't add lights just for the sake of adding them, because at the end it will end up with you'll end up with something that is a bit convoluted and a bit too hard to read in a way. So let's go ahead and set up a simple presentation render. We already have the key light. Let's turn this off for the time being. I want to create two lights, and this is kind of like the real first tip that I want to give you. If you're presenting a character, like a creature like this in a base, this is actually a pretty useful tip if you're doing collectibles, for instance. So let's create another area light. This time I'm just gonna bring this to the right hand side, and I'm gonna press the R key on my keyboard, press then Y so that I rotate on the Y axis, and type 90. So I have that there. Maybe scale that up as well. And let's go ahead and set this to be 1000 watts, right? So it's a light from the right. Let's go to the top. So if you want to go to the top, you can click on the Z thing here, on this gizmo. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this. So I'm going to press Shift D and drag this across on the x-axis, and let's go ahead and rotate it. So from this angle, R180, so I just rotated at 180 degrees, and let's go ahead and position this closer, right? So essentially what this is just a couple of light panels, one from the left and one from the right, and this already gives you something pretty convincing. Let's go ahead and increase this to maybe 5000, and increase the size as well. And let's do the same thing with the one on the left-hand side. So the one on the left-hand side could be maybe 2000 or 2500, yeah. And let's scale that one up as well. And then from the top view, let's push this one to the left, right? So this is another really cool thing about the area lights, that they have a decay. So basically, the further that I push the light away from the subject, the less intensity, obviously. So I can push this one closer. But the idea is just to have like a little bit of a bounce of fill light in here. All right, so only two area lights with slightly different sizes and slightly different intensities in the power, and this gives you something that looks pretty good. Again, all I'm doing here when I'm setting up these lights is looking at the volumes in my character, and obviously this might be very different from your concept or your sketch, but I'm looking at the areas that have a lot of contrast. So I have these very pronounced sort of like indentation here, the big nostrils of this creature here. The eyes are very rounded, but it has like, again, some kind of like indentation here at the top. These sort of like flappy areas here for the bottom lips, and obviously the the thickness of the neck in general. So I think this is working well, but you can totally increase the size of these two lights and the power as well. So let's set this one to 5000, and maybe even more than that. Let's go for 10,000. And let's do the same thing with this one, 10,000. And you see that right now what I'm doing by increasing the size and the strength of both lights is decreasing the contrast. So I'm just kind of like flattening the entire thing. And that is the type of things that you should be looking for when you render your scene, right? Or your character. So again, if you have a different concept, this will be very, very different. And the reason I want to emphasize this is because you might have a completely different character from what I have here. So if you copy exactly the same numbers that I have and the position of the lights, it's not going to give you exactly what you want. So it's about customizing it and tailoring it to your concept and to your work in progress. So let's go ahead and undo this, and I'm going to show you something else you can do. So this is kind of like what I like. Let's go to the top, and I'm just going to tilt this slightly. So the one on the right hand side, I'm going to press R to rotate it, and I'm just going to move it forward a bit. And you see, as I move this forward, actually, let's turn the other one off. As I move this one forward, you see how I'm going to reveal more of these volumes, right? So I'm going to push this forward, and I'm revealing more of that volume. If I put it right here, I'm just making things very, very flat, almost like a flashlight, and I don't want that. So I want to make sure that it's somewhere around there. So it's in a diagonal. And let's go ahead and turn on the other one. Select that one, and this one I'm going to do the same thing but in the opposite direction. So I'm going to rotate it, and I'm going to push it from the back. So this light is going to be coming from the back. So the difference, or what I'm looking for in here, is that the majority of the render of the character is in the shadows, and I'm just looking for a nice edge definition around the back, right? So that's the intention of moving this around and rotating it. So let's put it around there. Okay, I think that works fine. You still capture a little bit of the teeth in this area, so I think that's nice. And another thing that you can do, if you want something a little bit sharper, so you don't want that much of a diffuse light, you can reduce the size, right? So get something a little bit sharper in terms of the shadows, and then increase this to maybe 6,000, for example. Just increase the overall power of the light. But I think, you know, I was kind of like happy with what I had. Just wanted to give you that extra tip. So let's reduce that and increase the size again. All right. And this is just the beginning, right? We haven't actually played around with the spread or anything like that. So we can also reduce the spread, and that's going to be very, very pointy, you know, very sharp, like a single window at night or something. But I don't want to do that. I just want to show you that it's there. Maybe reduce it a tiny bit. Let's go ahead and set it to 100. Yeah, I think that's a nice render. Let's go ahead and turn on the other one, on the one from the right. And this one, I'm going to reduce it quite a bit with the spread. So it's very, very localized. Right, something like this. And the smaller the value here in the spread, the more intense things will appear. So as I reduce this, because obviously I'm concentrating the ray or focalizing the ray in a way, what I need to do is compensate by reducing this the power. So I'm going to set it to 1,500. And I think that's pretty good. Yeah, I think that works. So now I can take this one, maybe just play around with the position again. Just again trying to find that nice balance with the volumes and describing all the shapes that I have in here. And this one as well, I'm just gonna push it back a bit. All right, just so that you know what I'm trying to achieve here. This sort of area right here, I want this to be the area that has the most contrast. So I'm trying to find a nice balance between the rays of this light coming from the left back and this one from the right. Sorry, yeah, left back and right front. All right, so now that I have this, let's go ahead and name them. So this one is going to be fill left. Actually, this is more like a rim light, so let's call it rim light from the left. And this one is going to be a fill from the right. Right? Just on a side note, I always kind of like remember this type of names and things based on the mood. So sometimes I just in my files, I don't know if I did it in this one actually. Let me just check. Yeah, no, I didn't do it in this one. But just as a silly thing, I always call this one "It Feels Right." Right? So it's a light that is a fill, but it feels right. So it just, in other words, it's just emphasizing that idea that it's not about just adding lights for the sake of adding it. It needs to have a purpose and it needs to feel right. That is the idea with it. Anyway, so we have the key light here as well. So let's turn the key light back on. So this is kind of like the simple setup. It's a 3-point lighting setup. But again, it's sort of flattening everything. So what I like to do again is make sure that I have my key light right? So this is working fine. I have the sharpness of that cast shadow that I like. Maybe I will actually increase that power a little bit more and maybe increase the size. Something like that. And then I will start bringing in the other ones. So the one from the right-hand side. This one is pretty strong, especially because I have the key light coming from the right-hand side as well. So I'm going to reduce now this one quite a bit. Let's actually push it to something like 400, right? So it's very, very subtle. You see, this is the effect of that right one. In fact, now that I look at it, I could just potentially take this one and push it back a bit and rotate it back again so that it doesn't compete with the key light too much. And let's bring in the rim light. And there we go. So we have something that looks quite nice. Let's reduce this now. And the rule of thumb here, at least as a personal rule of thumb, I would say, is that the key light should be the most intensive one, right? Or the one that produces the most intensity in the scene. So this one is now pretty intense. So I can reduce this to 1,200. Just a tiny bit of it. The one on the right-hand side is 400, and the one that is the key light is set to, let's set it to 1,700. All right, that is not too bad. So that's the idea, that the key light should always be the most intense light. Now, just want to emphasize that it doesn't mean that the key light has to be in this direction, right? The key light could be the one at the back for a much more dramatic render. It's just that, you know, you have to decide what's the type of mood that you want to go for. All right, so now let's go ahead and talk about the materials, because materials are going to change things quite a bit, and we might have to come back to the lights and, you know, readjust them based on the intensity, or, you know, how much reflection we add to the materials and all of that. So for the materials, we're going to keep things very, very simple. It's actually, let me just show you this one. We're going to try to emulate this sort of like clay render. I personally really like this as a work in progress. So this is actually fairly simple to achieve. And I'm going to show you some techniques as well. So let's try to achieve this one first, now that we sort of covered the kind of like the concepts and the theory about like lighting up a scene. And what I'm going to do is switch to the lights that I already have. And just because, you know, I already placed them in a nice way, and I'm going to show you an extra light that I didn't cover, which is this one. But I'll show you that in a bit. In fact, let's turn that off. And that is the background light. I'll cover that in a second. And just to make sure that, you know, I don't skip anything or everything is the same as I showed you before, I have my key light, I have my fill light on the right hand side, and I have the left side, the left key light basically. Now, in this case, the key light, which is this one right here, is not the brightest one, right? You see, it's like, let's set it to 400, so it is pretty easy to see, compared to this one on the right-hand side that is set to 1200. However, the important thing to remember is that the smaller the value in the spread, the more concentrating the effect of that sort of power would be. So if I go ahead and toggle this off and just leave the key light, this is still the strongest or the most powerful light in the scene. Even though if I select it here, it is 400 watts because I have the spread at 21. Whereas in the fill on the right-hand side, if I select that one, it is set to 1200, but the spread is set to 180, right? So you see in the actual render, it is a pretty nice and clean and diffuse light that is giving me a nice contrast in all of these volumes. And then if I turn on the key is very, very strong. The same thing goes for the one on the left-hand side. Right? So that's just a couple of things to remember, again, to re-emphasize the whole idea. You don't have to guide yourself or follow exactly these numbers that, okay, if the key light is this one, then I have to make this number larger. Just keep in mind that you also have the spread to play around with. And in different software, in different rendering software, they might be called different. So it's more about the concept than the actual practicality of the values that you should put in each one of the lights. So just keep that in mind. All right, so I think the only difference between this one that I had already set up and what we did before is that I push, let me just check. Yeah, so it's almost in the same area. So what I've done really is I push this one on the right-hand side a little bit backwards so that I get more of that nice contrast that you see here compared to the other one. Let's compare it. Let's make sure that we get all of these things right. I mean, it's pretty similar. It's just that I think the one that I have in the previous one, it's a bit softer, the light, but the contrast is very similar. Anyway, this one I mentioned so that, you know, I cover everything that I wanted to cover. All right, so let's go ahead and start with the rendering setup. So I'm going to start with the background because that's pretty easy. And by the way, for the background, I have used these 3 images. So it's a very, very simple base color. I have some normals that give me a little bit of detail in there and a roughness map. You can get like materials from, you know, online that, you know, do the same sort of thing. I just downloaded an image and then I run it by the 3D sampler, by the way. So I got those images. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select that background. I'm going to press the Control space to create like a full screen of this. So that is an extra little tip in case you don't know. You can hover over any of these windows that we sort of like split the workspace on, and then just press Control Spacebar, and it just gives you this full screen so that we can work a little bit better. All right, so if you have the Node Wrangler, that's a plugin that comes with Blender, you can enable that, select the Principled BSDF material, hold Control, Shift, and T, and that will create the material for you. But I'm going to keep it simple. So just from my browser, I'm going to drag and drop the base color in here. So that's just an image. I'm going to drag and drop the normal map, and let's do the same thing for the roughness map. All right, so we have 3 different maps in here. The way that you set this up, again, is very, very easy. We're going to take the base color and drop it into the base color. We're going to take the roughness, drop it into the roughness. And for the normal map, we need a normal node. So I'm going to press Shift-A, type normal map. There we go. And we plug in the color into the color and the normal into the normal. That's it. Now, the last thing that I need to do is to tell Blender how I want to map this into my object. So I'm gonna go Shift A and mapping and click on that. And that's just the mapping node. So I'm gonna select this vector and put it into the vector. And then I'm just gonna give it the texture coordinates. So Shift A, let's type texture coordinate. And we're gonna use the UVs because I have UVs for that specific object, right? So that's about it, really. Let's go ahead and press Control and Spacebar. And you see, we now have, let's actually enable this rendering here. And we now have this nice, simple background. We can probably increase the size a little bit, but we have a very simple background that is not totally plain, and that's the reason I wanted to mention it. You can just go for a plain color, but I think having a little variation in the roughness or potentially bumps or normal, that makes it look a little bit nicer. You don't see much in the final render, but anyway, is there, and I just wanted to show you the entire process. All right, so that's it for the background. One thing that I'm going to mention about this, though, which is also very, very important, is that it's all about the contrast, right? So if you're going to go for a material that is light or that has a lighter values like I have right now, having a background that has enough contrast that is dark, like in this case, almost pitch black, is going to make the character pop and it's going to enhance the silhouette a little bit more. So very, very important to keep these ideas or these concepts in mind. All right, let's move on to the character. So I'm going to select the character here and let's go ahead. We don't need normal map. So this is going to be pretty simple. Actually, we don't need to zoom in because all the things that we're going to do, we can do them from here. So let's just add more space. So the color, we're going to go for some sort of clay. So I'm just going to select a clay color and maybe desaturate a little bit more, make it darker. Okay, something like this. I think this one looks quite nice. And the rest will be just playing around with the roughness. I'm going to make it a bit more rough. Let's go for 0.7. And also, if you expand the specular, I think by default this is 0.5 now in the latest version of Blender, which is fine. But I want the full specular. So in the IOR level, I'm going to set it to 1. And that's it. We have a clay render ready to go. Now I'm going to use the same material for the teeth as well. So another simple trick here in Blender is that you can link materials. So I'm going to select the teeth and then Shift select the body or the head. And then with those selected, I'm going to press Control and L. And Control L is just to link or transfer data. So I'm going to click on Link Materials. That's it. So now the teeth is using exactly the same material as the head. So if I change this, it's going to also change to the teeth as well. Cool. And the other material that I need to change is the eyes. So I'm going to select the eyes. I think I already done that. So I'm just going to do a new one just in case, just to show you the entire thing. Like I said, principle, BSDF. So just to start from scratch. All right. What I want with this one is I just want to make it black. And I want to make it very reflective, so it reflects the environment. Let's turn this on here as well to render. All right, so you see like the little highlight in there. That's it. There's nothing more. Maybe the specular set it to 1 as well, so it's fully specular. And that's it in terms of the rendering. Let's go ahead and also create a material for the base. So I'm going to select that base, and I'm going to click on black color. I think black goes really well with the rest of this setting. Maybe not full black, something like that, like a dark gray. And the roughness is fine. You can also use a custom map to plug it into the roughness if you wanted to. Again, it's all about the subtleties. So let me just show you what I mean. In my final render here, you'll notice that the base has these sort of like scratches, or it's kind of like being polished. It's not perfect. Again, I spent like literally just a couple minutes putting something in there. So you can just do that with any map as well, that you just plug in into the roughness. But again, just for the sake of showing you the whole thing, I have this texture that I downloaded from Unsplash, I believe. And this is kind of like the texture that I used to create the normal map and all of that for the background. So I can just drag and drop that one there. And let's go ahead and hold Control and T. And because I have the Node Wrangler enabled, it automatically creates this texture coordinate and mapping and all of that. And let's go ahead and set the color space to non-color, because this is just a black and white image connected to the roughness. And by the way, before we continue with this, let's come back to this one. I think I forgot, sorry, to the background. I forgot to set the roughness to non-color. as well as the normal map. So this is very important, otherwise it's not gonna look good. So yeah, just forgot to do that. Let's go back in here, and in the base, let's add a bit of a space here. Something that is pretty cool as well in Blender is that you can visualize in the rendering tab, you can visualize the maps. So if you hold Control, Shift, and left click on the texture, you will be able to see it. So we definitely need a little bit more contrast than that. So what I can do is I can bring in, let's press Shift A and type ramp. So color ramp, and I'm gonna drop it in there. So it's kind of like the in-between. Let's hold Control and Shift and left click on the ramp so that we can see the output of the ramp. So this is what is happening. When you click Control and Shift, is basically plugging these things directly into the output material. So now we're just looking at the color ramp. So I'm gonna add some contrast. This is kind of like the levels in Photoshop. So I'm just gonna add some levels, or like contrast this a little bit more, right? And let's see what this does. There we go. So we can just play around with these values, and if you want to make things a bit more reflective, maybe you can take this white value, make it more like a grayish tone. I think this is fine. I mean, you can use any texture, plug it into a color ramp, and that goes into the roughness, and that gives you sort of like a nice, you know, variation in the roughness. It's all about the subtleties, like I said, but that's pretty much it. All right, let's go back to the idea of the tutorial, which is presenting this nicely. And I think the current setup of these lights is working. You can come back and, you know, increase the intensity of some things or add a few more. But as a very basic 3-point light setup, this is working. Now, the extra light that I didn't mention is the background one. So the background is just adding this nice fade here. And actually, I just noticed that there's like some stretching here on the back. Maybe I need to just create a new UV. So let's do that. So I'm going to select the background, press Tab, so I can access these the edit mode. And I'm going to press A and then select everything. And then I'm going to go to UV and click on Wrap. And all right, so that fixes it. But we're gonna have to do a couple more things. So let's go to, you might not have to do this, just this is like an extra thing. So UV editor. So you see this is the unwrap of that background, and this is the texture. So you see it's not, let's get out of the camera for a second. So we might have to increase the size. So to do that, I'm just gonna press S and scale the UVs. So you see that's what's happening there. Maybe I have to scale that in the Y axis as well. Sorry, in the X axis. All right. So that's fine. So just as a, you know, I took a little bit of I branched out in there, but basically what I've done is just I created the UVs again for my background because it wasn't working, and I just scale it so that it sort of like tiles a bit. That's it. All right, let's go back to what we're doing. So this light in here is also an area light, and what it's doing is providing an extra bit of contrast or light to add contrast to the background, so that it's not that pure black, right? And you see that the rays of this light are not really affecting the model. It's purely to separate the background, or that plane, that plane that I'm using as a background from the actual model. And that tiny little halo or extra light, it helps to make the character pop, and you know, it adds to the three-dimensionality of that render. Now you might notice that this is a circle instead of a square. To change that, all you have to do is select the area light, and you go to the shape and you change from square to a disk. In this case, it doesn't make much of a difference, but if I just were to duplicate this, I'm going to show you the effect of just the background light. If I change it to a square and increase the intensity, but reduce the spread, let's do it like so. Maybe increase the scale. You see that the shape is a little bit more evident, right? So this is the only reason why I didn't want to have that sort of shape, even though it's very diffuse. So I just changed that to a disk, and that way when I increase the disk and increase the spread, is going to be more like that sort of halo. Just be careful. In this case, I increased it a bit too much, so now I'm contributing to the light setup of the character. So I'm going to push this back a little bit. So that's the idea, really. That's the reason I have that backlight in there. And that is pretty much it. So we have 4 lights. 3 are the main lights, your key light, your 2 fill lights, and then you have your background light. And this is creating this much more interesting render that I believe it is much more powerful and more visually striking than, you know, just creating a screenshot in ZBrush and presenting that. So I know that this tutorial is being a long one, but like I said, I wanted to include some of the concepts that that we talk about and that we work in the extra mile course. So that's why it's a little bit longer. And the idea, or what I really want you to take away from this, is that you can apply the same principles, the same workflow in any other rendering software, right? That you know, like I said, they might have different names. So instead of you know, directional light, it might be called the sun, or vice versa. But it's about applying these principles to the render. Now, to finalize this video, one thing that I truly believe is one of the best things that you can do, especially as a 3D concept artist, is to create your own library of assets. In fact, if you are interested in creating your own assets, I have a workshop that is called the Asset Library Workshop. I'll leave a link as well in the video in case you are interested. But the whole idea is to create your own library of assets so you can use them and reuse them in your projects and speed up the workflow and speed up the way that you work as well. So in my case, I would have something like this. I have a Blender file that is ready to go, and all I have to do is bring in my character, assign a material, play with the lights, because like I said, it might be different from this creature, and then I can do my renders, right? And that is the way I created. If I go back in here, this is the way that I created all of these renders, right? It's from the same light setup, the same light scenario that I just showed you, but I just changed the material, the colors, all of that good stuff to create different lightings. In this one here on the right hand side, it's a much more dramatic lighting, and I think I only have a key light from the right hand side and then the fill or rim light from the left. And that creates obviously something a bit more dramatic, more sinister than, let's say, something like this. There's a bit more, you know, there's more ambient light. So this would be a great render for, let's say, a collectible or a toy. You know, these two I reckon would be nice for that. So it's depending on what you're trying to create or what type of industry you are in. At the end of the day, you just want to present something that looks nicer. So again, to wrap up this video, I'm just going to show you that once you have this, you can go ahead and save it as a template. Maybe delete the current character that you're using. But in my case, it just works fine. So delete the character if you want to. Save this file, and this will be your template. So next time that you bring or create something in here, let's just create something like a sphere, right? Let's say that you imported this new character. I want to turn off the creature, right? So you have this. All you have to do is from the materials, select the creature, which in this case, actually, we can call it clay, because that's really not Kali, clay. And that's it. So we just now have another character, and the light is set up is working fine as well. We can just tweak that. So you can save this file and then bring another character and render it like so. So to wrap up again, the reason I keep saying that I'm going to wrap it up, but basically what I want to do is show you how once you have this as your template, you can go ahead and tweak it to create something completely different in terms of the mood. Like let's recreate this one just to give you an idea. So I'm going to select the character that brings in my simple material. I'm going to change it for a bright yellow color, like so. I'm going to increase or decrease the roughness actually, so it's more like a plasticky material. Right? And before we tweak the lights, let's go ahead and select the background, and we're going to change this a little bit. So let's actually remove the base color so that we have a clean color, and we can take that. And again, what I'm doing here, just as a simple reference for the presentation, if the color is this sort of like yellowish, you know, orange tone for the background, just to add more contrast and make it more appealing, I might go for something that is slightly complementary to that yellow, so like a bluish tone, roughly. Something like that. If that is too much, just keep things subtle. I don't want the background to distract from the actual character. That's it. So that is the background updated. Let's select the base and let's make it maybe like a slightly lighter version as well. So again, the whole focus or the whole contrast of this image is given by the actual character, which is what I want. And let's go ahead and turn off some of the lights one by one. And we can start playing around with the position again. So what I want to do now is create something a bit more front on, like so. And I'm going to increase the spread again, what I'm trying to do is make it a bit more diffuse so that the shadows are not as sharp. And maybe increase the size as well. So this is kind of like a nice soft box coming from the top. There we go, something like this. All right, and let's go ahead and increase that. Obviously, we increase the spread, so we need to compensate with this, maybe 1,000 watts. Maybe that's too much, 800. There we go. Let's do the same thing with the fill right. I think the fill right is on point. Maybe we can push it more towards the back and rotate it. And we can reduce the spread so we can concentrate the effect of that. Okay, and let's do the same thing with the fill from the left-hand side. So again, this one could be very concentrated. Let's try something extreme like 5 and push it here, reduce the size. So you see what it's doing is a very concentrated rim light. All right, so it might be too much. This is too exaggerated, so let's increase the spread. And I tend to do this a lot. I like to visualize exactly what these this type of lights are doing, and then I just reduce the intensity. So 500, maybe less than that. And we can increase the size as well. All right. I think, you know, this is the type of thing that I spend quite a bit of time just tweaking this to make sure that whatever I do with these lights or whatever I place them, again, it has an intention. Let's take the background as well. And the background is giving me that nice fade at the back. I'm going to increase the power a bit and increase the spread so there is more of it. There we go. So I think this is looking fine, but what I'm missing is a little bit of a fill in this area. So there's still quite a bit of contrast in here. So there's a couple of things you can do. The first one is you can go to the world, and I did mention this at the beginning of the tutorial. So if you set this back to 1, is using this default color and a strength of 1 to increase that. So you see these dark areas are now you know, more grayish, they're not as dark. Let's set this back to 0 so you can see the difference. Or alternatively, what you can do is create another light. So I'm going to take my key light, press Shift D to duplicate it. I'm going to turn all the lights now, and I'm going to guide this light towards the top area. So I want to make sure I have some fill light in this area right here, right? Obviously, this light is sort of like flattening things quite a bit. But it does look interesting, but you see, I kind of like lose the definition of like the volume of this eye, which is very prominent. So all I want to do is place it there first, just to see what this light is doing and the direction of it. Then I'm going to reduce the size. And from the properties of this, I'm going to reduce it quite a bit. So let's start with 50. And then let's reduce the spread as well so that we can concentrate it in an area. By the way, you can also do this with a spotlight, for example. But I think this is fine. Let's just try to place it a bit better. I think it's the angle here that needs to be, yeah, something like this. All right. So again, this is still pretty intense. But now I know for a fact what this is doing. So I'm going to call it extra fill or face fill. And let's turn everything on again. And now you see it sort of flattens everything, and now it doesn't look as interesting, right? So all I want to do is add a tiny bit of light in there. So let's start from 10, and then let's start pushing this forward a bit. All right, I think something like this, but it's still, I feel that I lost a lot of the contrast actually. So let's push it more towards the top. Yeah, so now we have a bit more of this. I'm looking at the eyes really, because that's usually what people are driven to when you present a character, like the face or the eyes. So as long as this one works, I think we're in a good place. Also, another thing that I noticed is that the material itself is a little bit too reflective. So I'm just going to decrease that just by adding it a bit more roughness to it. So still keeping it within that sort of like plasticky material, but not as specular. And there we go. So that's it. Again, I know that I said that it was just to wrap it up, but I wanted to show you how easy, once you know the basics, once you know the principles of what you want to do, what you want to achieve with your presentation render or your work in progress, tweaking the lights and tweaking the materials and all of that is actually pretty simple. And you can save this as another type of render, and every time that you want to render your character, you can sort of like have a consistent rendering type that you put out there and that you produce. All right, and just as a final thought, just keep in mind that all of these techniques, these concepts and ideas that I share with you in this video are software agnostic, meaning that you don't have to have a complicated rendering software or like a very powerful computer to just create nice looking renders. You can do this with any decent computer, Blender, just following the tips that I give you today, but you can apply exactly the same principles in your render engine of your choice. All right, so I really hope that this has given you some ideas. Definitely, if you have some thoughts or you want to share what you do with this tutorial, by all means do it, and you can just tag me at Pablander, and I'll love to see what you do with this. So I'll leave this tutorial here, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.